Let me just, here we go. From beginning, okay. All right, so again, thank you, Chris, for having me. I'm really excited to give this presentation in a new format. This is my first time doing it as a webinar. I've done it as a workshop and also as a shorter session at a blog conference. So it's just neat to see this particular presentation evolve. Just to give you just a real brief background, up until May, I was Director of Integrated Communications at Elizabethtown College in South Central Pennsylvania, and I was there for 5 years. And prior to that, I worked in e-commerce and radio, and through all that, I've also been a freelance writer on and off, and I'm also a creative writer. So that's really where I got the inspiration for this presentation and to put a little more thought into the words that we use on the web, in social, in our print materials, you know, and everything that we do in higher ed. And since this is a social media users group, of course, you know, we can think of everything from a social perspective. So basically, throughout this presentation, I'm just going to go over what it means to tell a good story. We're going to get into how to make your stories, no matter how large or small they might be, how to make them sound good, and how to edit. And I'm also going to leave you with some resources at the end. So we'll get started with this. Does anybody remember seeing these maybe back in elementary school or junior high, these little word games? I'll just let you take a moment to look at what you think this puzzle might mean. So if you guessed downtown, you're right. See, aren't these fun? Let's do another one. Okay, if you thought man overboard, that's right. Have any ideas what this one might be? All right, if you just shouted just between you and me to yourself, you'd be correct. And we'll do one more. Yes, this is 6 feet under. So I start with these just to show you that words can be fun. You know, words are your friends. You know, there's lots of letters that make up words, that make up these sentences. So I just want to remind everybody that you can have some fun with your writing. You know, you have palindromes, which are the same words forward and backward, like pop or dad or mom. So just remember, words are fun and words are your friend. So no matter what medium we're using, you know, no matter where we're telling our story, before we start writing, we need to think of a couple things first, though. So who are we writing for? You know, what is our target audience? And why are we writing for them? So, you know, especially with social media, there's a lot of things that are just, you know, just to build relationships, just to engage people. Not everything might have a very specific call to action, but think about what you're trying to gain from your message. For example, if you're working with prospective students, are you looking to get them to apply, to pay their deposit, you know, depending on where you're at in the lead cycle? Are you trying to get people to come to an event or sign up for something? Are you trying to get them to make a gift? Or, you know, are you just building relationships and engaging, which of course will plant seeds for later involvement of your audience, you know, whoever they might be. And then think about, you know, what makes a good story, but also what makes a story good. Those are two different statements there, even though they sound a little alike. So if you think about some of the movies that you've seen or some of the books you've read, you might think, wow, this is a really great idea for a book, but maybe it wasn't executed very well. Maybe, you know, it was just, you know, the plot was there, but it just went in a direction you didn't see it. So think about that with your social stories, with your web stories. You know, you might have a good idea, but how are you telling that story? Is it as effective as it could be? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Some of you might be familiar with this classic story arc. You know, speaking of screenwriting and novel writing, you know, there's a pretty specific model of what a classic story would look like. Now, with a social media post, we're not going to get as in-depth as that, but I'm just sharing this with you just so you can maybe take a different approach to your post and consider them as if they were small stories. So when we're talking about posting to social media or the web, our stories in higher ed, we do have characters. You know, maybe it's a prospective student, an alum, a donor, a specific faculty member. There's a plot, you know, there's a journey from graduating high school and starting college, or graduating college and going out into the world, or discovering that they really have close ties with NYU and they want to give back in some way, if you're talking about alumni. There's a setting, of course, your campus and the places where your students and faculty members go and where your alumni end up in the world. And then point of view. You know, your stories also have a point of view. Who is telling the story? Is the person telling the story involved in it? You know, a lot of times on social, it's a person or people behind the account, but we're really that organization or that academic department telling that story. So use point of view to your advantage. So when you're talking about your audience and going back to a little bit about what makes a good story and what makes a story good, it might do a couple things. So, you know, the last item on that list, human, I think that's really evident in social media because it's probably the platform where we can be the most human. I'm pretty much an advocate for talking in a conversational tone and keeping the audience in mind and everything user-friendly in any medium we use. But I think in social, it's the most accepted way to just be human. So think about that when you're telling your story. But above all, I think your social media posts or whatever content you're creating should evoke emotions. You know, are you making people laugh? Cry? Are you, bringing out a feeling of nostalgia? Do you make them want to help or make a positive change? It should be memorable. That's the kind of things that gets content shared. If you like what you've read, you might want to share it, you might remember it, you might talk about it later. And of course, for those posts that do call for an immediate call to action, you really want it to be action-oriented. Instead of saying, check out this event and putting a link, tell a little story and make them want to click that to sign up. So this picture here, I went to a wedding a couple months ago at the Reading Museum in Reading, Pennsylvania, and part of the cocktail hour was in this art gallery, and I came upon this picture. It's a little hard to see in this picture by itself, but this is a life-size photo. And if you take a moment, just look and see what these peasants and farmers are looking at. Like, just take a moment to take it in. So if you've noticed that they're looking up at a hot air balloon, they're kind of taking this break. They're working hard in the field, and they're just stopping and enjoying this object in the air. But if you take a step closer, here's a picture of me with it. The artist here was very deliberate in this painting. He made it life-size, so whoever was viewing the photo could be part of the photograph. So there I am, as if I'm in the field looking up at this hot air balloon. So I used to work in admissions for a career school many years ago, and we had to watch a lot of training videos and training techniques, and we, I don't know if any of you have heard of Zig Ziglar, but he had this close technique, and it was called paint the picture close. You put your prospect in the picture, and you make them part of the action. So think about that. Think about this particular picture and what you can do with your audience to put them there in the action and in that story. Make them take part in the story. So that kind of leads us into point of view. There's different choices you can make when you're writing your content. You think of third person all the time, but sometimes I think that this can sound a little stuffy and academic when a lot of your content might say the student will this, the student will that, and that might be okay for the curriculum and for the accreditation paperwork, but it's okay to be personal. Think about jumping into the second person and saying you will. And the same thing when you're talking about you could say the college this or the department that. You might see that in mission statements and things. But what about using the, talking as the institution? We pride ourselves on this. NYU is known for that. So point of view can really make a difference in your stories and in your social posts and in your web content. So think about it. It might seem just like a very small choice thinking point of view, but it really does matter to the end result. We all have these in writing. We all have our crutches and cliches and things we do all the time. Think about the common phrases that you see maybe at NYU or your alma maters or other college campuses. Everybody has a beautiful campus. There's a lot to do on campus. We have caring faculty, our friendly admissions staff. And these are all great things, and they are true. They're true. You're not lying when you say these things, but they're cliche, right? Why don't you show these statements and what they mean? Especially in social media, visual photos and short videos are really great ways to demonstrate this. So show your beautiful campus. My gosh, yesterday here in Lancaster was, a snow day, and those are great days. In the Northeast, we have 4 seasons. Show off your beautiful campus, but use pictures to help guide there. So don't just say it, show it. Caring faculty, there could be really strong photography with a mentoring opportunity that you can see. So, and of course you might want to have some text to go along with those pictures, but think about it, and not just with pictures, but what can you do in the actual content? Instead of saying everyone here is nice, show an example. At Elizabethtown College, one of the things that people always said after they visited our campus, how everybody holds open the door for you. So that could be a way to infer that everybody's nice. So along with that, there's in the creative writing world, and you might have heard it in in your own professional life, but there's this notion of show, don't tell. So these are some techniques to do that. Just like in that picture I showed you and the Zig Ziglar example, paint the picture. Use the someone like you close. So tell a story about somebody that is just like your target audience member. Use the 5 senses. I think we really forget about that. Even in writing, you can bring, smells and touches and tastes alive. If you're writing about, a chili cook-off on campus or something like that, or you're writing about the dining hall opportunities on campus. Incorporate those 5 senses. At Elizabethtown, we were right down the street from a Mars chocolate factory, and every couple days this chocolate smell would just permeate campus. And this became a shared experience. Alumni remember that, and I use that in a lot of our admissions copy. One of our headlines was "Close to everything smells like chocolate." So you can do those types of things to bring your campus alive. You can tell a story through someone else's lens. Maybe you have student ambassadors, or you do, some colleges do the Instagram takeover. So sometimes somebody else telling the story gives you other opportunities to share things that you might not normally. And of course, some of the examples I already gave, you can do this through photos, videos, and graphics too. You don't always have to rely on your words, but your words can complement these multimedia elements. All right, so those are some techniques on how you might tell your story, about point of view, characters, plot, to think about your social post as stories. Now we'll get into how to make your content sizzle. I like that word, sizzle. So a couple things we're going to cover through the next slide. We're just going to talk about stronger word choice, how to be clear, how to use brevity to your advantage, and maybe how to work in things from the creative writing world, such as literary devices, and also how your source material might help your stories be stronger. So even in social media, especially actually in social media, every word counts. I think Twitter, it's still 140 characters, right? I think Twitter has really taught all of us that every word matters. But you can use those skills from creating really concise tweets, moving on to Facebook and web content. So we'll get into some examples about that. So first, let's talk about great words. I want you to think for a second, and if we were doing this live, I'd ask you to shout out some examples, but think to yourself, what are some words that we overuse today? How about awesome? Cool. Sometimes these little words just become acknowledgments. Oh, hey, I was on this webinar today. Oh, awesome. No, the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone National Park, that's awesome. But as you can see, the English language, we have all these wonderful words, but sometimes, over time, they get diluted a little bit. How often do we say great? We have a great campus. We have a great staff. We have a great program. We have great faculty members. Go through your copy, go through some of your past posts, and how often do you say the word great? We have this vast English language where there's words that we can use. Instead of it's cold, maybe it could be frigid. I have this book, it's called Better Than Great by Arthur Plotnick. And the entire book, it's a couple hundred pages long, but it's dedicated to finding words that are better than great. So it's divided up into chapters for like maybe temperatures or food, different experiences. But, instead of just right-clicking on your thesaurus, on a Word document or something, actually page through a thesaurus or look at some other words and build up your vocabulary a little bit, because, or we might all have great vocabularies, but sometimes when it comes to writing, we just, without thinking about it, we just type great, even though we know there are better words out there. So think about word choice. Clear versus clever. I'll be honest, I love puns and I love wordplay and I like to be clever and witty, especially when we're talking about headlines or leading into stories. An example, last night, my husband made dinner for us, and I posted to Facebook that I had noodled butter for dinner last night. Now, somebody said, "Did you mean buttered noodles?" Well, here I was just trying to be clever and saying noodled butter because I was trying to emphasize that the butter was the most important part, not the noodles. So, sometimes things can go over people's head when you try to be too clever and smart. This mainly happens in headlines, so you want to make sure that your audience is very clear on what the message is. But a great happy medium, especially for doing headlines, is to maybe put your clever anecdote, your clever headline as part of the headline, and then use a colon, and then do a subheadline where it actually tells what the audience should expect. So you can still have some fun, but make sure you're clear. Don't sacrifice clarity for the sake of being funny, because not everybody always has the same sense of humor, like my noodled butter comment. So you want to be user-friendly and you want to be human. And as I said before, social, we are pretty much more conversational when we're writing for social. We're more natural. But think about some things that maybe you're sharing on the social channels for other campus constituents. These words here, and even with search engine optimization, I don't know that prospective students are searching for how to make their matriculation deposit. They might just be searching for deposit. So, what are some words that you can use? Now, there's a difference between academic speak and being educational and informing your audience. So this also goes back to clarity. If you're using these terms that parents, if there might be a lot of first-generation college students and their parents aren't familiar with what these academic term means, and then the students aren't. So use words that they know what they mean. Of course, you might have to use the official language too, where it calls for it, but use some synonyms within the same post or on the same page. So moving along on how to add more sizzle to your content, alliteration is absolutely effective. There are some great literary techniques you can use that help give your content a beat, a little bit of a rhythm. These are some of the techniques that that this paragraph or social post sounds good. This magazine content really sings, and sometimes we don't know why, but it's because there are some of these literary elements to it. And sometimes these things just come naturally to the writer, and you might not even realize you're doing them, but alliteration is a great tool. There's this wonderful book that I've read this year called In the Kingdom of Ice by Hampton Sides, and it's about a polar exploration. And this is one of my favorite lines from the book. Bennett warmed to the idea of an ambitious Arctic adventure. That sentence does so much. So first we have the alliteration in the ambitious Arctic adventure. But if you read it again and look more closely at it, you'll see that there's also he's being a little playful with his words. He warmed to the idea of an Arctic adventure, of something cold. So there's this fun juxtaposition there. And those are some things that you can do to make your content sing, whether it's a Facebook post or a tweet or some web content. So I reviewed this book, and one of the sentences in my review, you can read it there, I won't read it to you, but I talk about how he's a publishing tycoon, and then I say that he heralds stories. So herald is the name of a lot of newspapers, so I tried to be playful there, you know, do a play on words. So those are just some examples that you can use to have a little fun with your words. So repetition can be effective. You might remember back in elementary school or junior high when you learned about proper placement of a comma, and this classic sentence, you know, if edited by an English teacher, might say he came, saw, and conquered. That doesn't have the same effect as he came, he saw, he conquered. So again, that repetition gives it a nice rhythm, and you know, it just sounds great. Now, sometimes we tell a lot of stories in our social posts, like we were promoting an event on campus, we're doing a recap of an event, we're writing a web story about a particular person. Well, repetition can be effective, but redundancy can also be blah, especially if you're overusing a name or a particular term. So you can see in this, I put a little example here about me speaking at a conference. So that could have sounded very different if I just used my name and pronouns. So here we say Lancaster native, a former journalist, a word nerd, and then she. In an article I wrote about something in Iceland, I said banana boxes, but I had to say it again. So I called them Chiquita crates. So when you're going through your drafts, look for words that are the same, and how else could you say it? Again, that's going to make your content sound a lot more vibrant because you're using different words. But repetition in the same thing can be effective because it adds a punchiness to your text. So here's another example of some redundancy. This is the first paragraph in an article, a travel article I wrote about going to Iceland. And I talked about volcanoes in Iceland a lot in this paragraph, but it could have been very boring if I kept saying the allure of Iceland, when I flew to Iceland. So you can see I said volcano once, then I called it a lava-filled mountain, then I called it Bardabunga, and then I called it finally a name that I can't pronounce. And then instead of, I used spew and eruption, and I used Iceland and Little Island Country. So again, I added some vibrancy to this by just changing up the words so it wasn't repetitive to the reader. A great trick is to read your work aloud. If you notice that you're saying the same word over and over again, it can trip you up a little bit. So go through and see how you can change out some of those words for different words. Another way to add sizzle to your sentence is to write in the active voice. In the world of academia, passive voice is is a very big thing, especially when it comes to writing papers and research and things. But when you're writing for people, for your audience, you want it to be active. Active voice sings. So here's some examples on this page. I won't read them all because I know you have the slide up and you can read them yourself. But imagine a sportscaster saying the ball was shot by him. A score was made. No, it sounds more exciting when you say he shoots, he scores. A fun time was had by all. Everyone had fun. The audience erupted in applause versus clapping was heard in the theater. Do you see the difference? Do you see how, more vibrant it sounds when you're using the active voice? Now, sometimes passive voice is necessary. You might see this a lot in legal documents, or some kind of sensitive statement that you have to give where you don't want to put blame on somebody. So for example, in the green on the bottom there, oops, something went wrong, versus oops, you did something wrong. So that kind of puts the blame. This is an example from Sprout Social, which some of you might be familiar with, but an error encountered. So this error, rather than blame the user saying, hey, you messed up, it's not placing the blame on anybody. So this is an example where passive voice might be acceptable. So there are reasons for active and passive voice, but I think generally when you're writing social media content, active voice is definitely best. So my next next tip is keeping your writing to a shorter length really benefits the reader. So why don't you try to perhaps use fewer words in your next piece of content, whether it's for the web or print? That was a mouthful, right? What I could have said was, be brief. So brevity is really important to your writing, especially if you're writing for a medium like Twitter where you only have so many characters to use. So to help with your brevity, is there a word for something else you're describing? I was writing a checklist for a book sale I was helping with, and I said that, okay, and at the end, make sure you write down how many there are. Well, I could have just put quantity and a blank line for them to fill in. Are you using unnecessary qualifying phrases? The fact of the matter is it's cold. Well, you could just say it's cold. And then the final example, there could be just a more succinct way to say something. I was editing a story, and the writer had said, I took all of her jewelry out of the jewelry box. Well, I just trimmed that down a little bit and said I emptied her jewelry box. So other ways to be brevity, or to help with brevity, is just to cut the clutter. Get right to the point of your content. And this is more for web content, not so much social, but remove those welcome messages. You don't need to thank anybody for visiting your page anymore. And this brevity can also help with calls to action. So if you, we encourage you to visit, or we encourage you to come visit campus. That could just be visit campus, and that could be, a button. It could be a link. Please give the admissions rep a call to set up an interview, or the call to action could just be schedule an interview. Now, if you're writing a letter or something, please give the rep a call might be a better way to do it. But if you're doing web content or social, you can just use these quick things. Or, if there's a list of things, the first thing to do is complete the comment up. You could just put start here or apply or step 1 and walk them through the process. So sometimes these fewer words just add clarity, and it takes people right to the point to what they need to do. Show a few screenshots of when I worked at Elizabethtown College. We had a decentralized web office, or web content system, and the career services department loved to go overboard. Now you'll see there's a banner image here, and then the headline was able to be a link, and then there was the little text underneath of that in white. They're kind of confusing the reader here. Click here for additional information about internships. Learn more about our Wings of Success summer internship program. Those are two different things. And the way our college website worked is it's kind of implied that this headline can be clicked on. So it's just a lot of unnecessary words there. And here's another one. Please email career services for more information. Employers can register here. Graduate schools can register here. Now, this really borders on web content, and best practices here, but they didn't know how to work within the content system, I'm guessing, and so they just put all these messages right on this banner. But it's very confusing, to have these multiple messages in one line. And then these are just some examples of a few financial aid. I always find that the financial aid departments or business offices on websites need the most help with content. This one has a whole bunch of call to actions, and then it has its mission statement right there. Well, if somebody's going to this website, they might just need some information. So I just bypass those mission statements. And again, it's not very user-friendly content here. And the same with this. Again, this kind of borders on what not to do with web content and how to lay out a page. But, it has a lot of things in here that they're not using their words very effectively. Like, you don't need to say financial office homepage. It basically looks like somebody created a Word document and then just pasted it into their CMS, because you can see at the top that it's at the financial aid office. So just some things to think about. So now we're going to get into, ways to repurpose your content. So think about your web content. Does it have an expiration date? Do you have a system to go back and remove that dated content? Or can you think about creating some evergreen content for social, so you can reshare it? You can look through your website and find content that might make for great social posts. I mean, there's a lot of things that could be dug up from your website that you could use and repurpose. Some other ways to add sizzle to your content might be to just change your process or change where you're getting things from. You know, if you feel that your writing is stale, you know, maybe it's because the ideas are stale, and you could just freshen things up a little bit. So, you know, maybe you just need a new mindset to approach your content and your writing. Maybe some new habits. You know, maybe you'll go in the morning and dig through some other news sources from across your campus, or, you know, across the world, and see what's out there to share. You know, so look for new stories and sources. Maybe do some new themes. You know, Throwback Thursday was a popular thing, and, you know, a lot of people find that still effective. But what are some other, you know, little trends and things that you could tweak in your own way to fit your reasons? Or maybe there's some new marketing initiatives at the school that will change the way that you're telling stories. For example, at Elizabethtown College, we started a new branding campaign for signature learning opportunities, which really weren't different than what other colleges did, you know, as far as internships and study abroad, but we packaged them as guaranteed signature learning opportunities where every student could do 2 of 5 of these before they they had to do 2 of 5 before they graduated. So we started telling more stories that revolved around those signature learning experiences. So thinking higher level at NYU or within the different schools, what initiatives are there and how can that impact your storytelling? You could probably find a lot of great things there. I had this in here. This is just a scholarship and creative arts day that happened at Elizabethtown College every year. So that was just one thing that we did to promote. I just thought this was a really strong, excuse me, a really strong message. A student had tweeted a year's worth of work in one poster. So I happened to see that on Twitter. So then I changed it into a picture to share on Instagram with the program cover, with her quote, and with a picture of a presentation. So look for your user-generated content, and maybe you can take those quotes and turn them into promotional opportunities for some of the initiatives. All right, so one of the things that not everybody enjoys, but I think it's really important to talk about. Some of the ways our words can be most effective is when we edit ourselves, you know, to take a step back. So before we edit, we want to write it first. I learned this from reading On Writing by Stephen King. He doesn't stop himself in the middle of writing. He just writes. If he needs to look something up, he doesn't stop that creativity. He just goes and he fills in those blanks later. So first things first, write out your drafts, even if you're just writing, you know, some social media posts. You know, so we don't write with red pens, so don't edit as you go. Get your thoughts out completely first. So this is my process for self-editing, and I'll share it with you. You know, yours might be different, or these might be some things to consider. But like I said before, write first and let it simmer a bit. You know, if you have time, maybe come back to it the next day. If you need to post it somewhat immediately, maybe take a coffee break. You know, do a bathroom break, do a Facebook break, come back and look at it with fresh eyes. I think that's really important. Read it aloud, you know, especially if it's a tweet or a Facebook post. That helps you catch typos. That also helps you catch maybe some syntax errors, you know, just the flow. Read it out loud. Does it sound like a person is saying it? If you're writing web content or a story, you might want to print it out and a hard copy, because sometimes your eyes like literally will glaze over. So looking on paper might help you edit. You know, if you're just pre-scheduling some tweets, which I don't necessarily recommend, but you know, if you are writing some tweets ahead of time for other people to approve, you know, maybe you can still print out a hard copy. But if you're doing it right into a scheduling program, it might be harder to do the hard copy. Share it with other people if you have a chance, you know, maybe if you need some feedback. And again, I know for individual posts, this self-editing process might be a little bit overkill, but you could work some of it into your day. And proofing versus editing. Editing is really structure. Am I telling this story the right way? Is this, you know, is it long enough? Is it too short? Like, that's kind of where you there's still an art to editing, whereas proofing is going through and looking for typos and punctuation errors and things like that. So there's a little bit of a difference between proofing and editing. When you are self-editing, these are some things to look out for. Of course, you have spelling and grammar, editing-induced errors. This is huge for me. Just yesterday, I changed around a sentence, and I didn't go back, and I left an extra "it's" in there. But more importantly, for the sizzling part of your content, look for those weak words. Look for great. Look for cool. What words can you put in there that'll really make your content shine? Look for redundancy. And then look for redundancy. I did that on purpose. Look for unnecessary or fluff words. The flow of it, that helps by reading out loud. And fact-checking. One tip that I do, especially if I'm working on a magazine article, I underline or circle everything that's a number or a title so I can go back and check those types of things. So again, social media posts, you might have to do this editing process a lot quicker. So next, and finally, as we wind down, the staff. A lot of your content might depend on, collaborating with each other. And I think the social media users group at NYU and other universities and colleges that have something like this is already a great step toward collaboration because you can learn and share from each other. So as far as resources go, maybe your department or team needs to set up a proofing process or some kind of workflow for your content. Is there a style guide? That was one thing at Elizabethtown that, every department seemed to have a different way of writing things. So, if there's some university-wide or some department-wide style guide, and include examples in that so people can learn from it. You have your content review. What types of content are you putting out there? What worked? What didn't work? And that will help you move forward. As you make some changes to this, to make your content more sizzling and make your words matter, kind of track that. Are people sharing it more? Are they engaging more? Look at that sort of thing. And then you could always use training and have a resource library. At Elizabethtown, I had a library with that book, Better Than Great, and the Thesaurus, and all sorts of fun resource books that not just helped with your content, but could also, in a way, inspire you to want to use certain words and want to write more. And then think about who writes, who reviews. Why? Why are they the best people to write? Why should they review it? So think about, and rethink job descriptions. On a broader level, when it comes to writing, a lot of times people just, get put into a role where they have to suddenly write a lot, but they don't necessarily have a writing background, or it's not necessarily part of their job description, and they're spending a lot of time writing. So rethink some job descriptions and rethink structure. And again, this part might go a little beyond just writing for social media, but just something to think about on a department-wide level. And finally, I'm going to leave you with some resources. There is some great reading for storytelling. I suggest that everybody who deals with stories in some way to read Lead with a Story by Paul Smith. It's just so effective. It's not just how to tell stories from a marketing point of view, but it's also from an organizational behavior standpoint, how stories can help organizations, with everything like boosting morale to even discipline. It's a really great book. Copyblogger is a great resource for writing for the web and social. Show Your Work by Austin Kleon is a great resource too to help boost your creativity. And you know what? Not your usual stuff. Read things that are out of your comfort zone. Pick up some magazines and just read a little more often, and that will help with your words too. And finally, there's some tools, Grammarly, your thesaurus, and some fun reference book, like I said, if you have an internal style guide. And finally, to kind of end where we started, one of the things where I keep being reminded that words are fun is I do word games. I do a couple every day usually. I mean, I skip some days, of course, but one of my morning routines is to do some kind of word puzzle. And Games Magazine, Games World of Puzzles it's called, is really great for wordplay games. So I'm not just talking crossword puzzles and cryptograms, but there's some really cool word games out there that can help you see that words are more fun. So I think that's it. I know I covered a lot of information, and some of it I hope is helpful to social, but maybe can bubble over into other parts of your job. So I guess I'm open to questions now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Let me just take the time to make sure I say thank you for joining us. I think you bring a lot of great suggestions and a lot of things that we've talked about. This group that is here is all part of the Social Media Ambassadors group, which means we do have this chance to connect and collaborate with one another. So I love that you speak to that at the end. I do want to ask you, and based on some things you've been talking about, what are some of your best practices for? I mean, you talk about auditing yourself, so to speak, and kind of that practice. But do you have in this work take the time to write when you can, and just talk about, if you could, for me, that writing process where you're literally writing out things and then going back and looking at it, over the course of a period of time. What is that process like for you, and how did you work to kind of perfect it for yourself?
Sure, that's a good question. My writing process isn't as concrete as some other writers that are out there, but generally for me, it all starts with an idea. I carry around a moleskin notebook. I know that I can put notes in my app in my iPhone, but sometimes, writing down an idea, on paper kind of solidifies it for me. So, when I was on campus at Elizabethtown, I was constantly overhearing what people were saying and observing and taking notice if a class doing some kind of project outside, or if I happened to walk by a classroom and saw something really interesting happening. I always kept my eyes and ears open. And so it's not exactly part of the writing process, but it's what fuels it. So I'm always open to ideas, and I'm always keeping track of ideas, so I can go back to these little lists and notes that I make for later to turn those into stories, whether it was a magazine article or just a social post that I wanted to share, maybe with a picture or a video. So as far as drafting goes, I don't really outline things, but yeah, I usually write a first draft, let it sit for a little while, come back to it, rearrange it, and I think the number one thing I learned is that I have a journalism background, so I would always, try and do a lead for the story, but then you tell the story again, and then you almost sum up at the end. I think for web content and for social, you just need to learn to cut back and share the heart of the story. So I think that's the biggest thing that changed with me writing for social and for the web, is that just get to the point. And I can be really verbose sometimes and wordy, so I think that was the biggest challenge for me. But I would say ideas, write it out, come back and edit it, and then publish it, and look for feedback, and always learn from what you published, and be open to editing and criticism. I think that's important.
I got a question here from Jasmine, asking if you have an opinion about how much text should be included in an image on a platform like Instagram, and in terms of how, really kind of focusing on what you think are the best ways with this content to deliver on kind of some of these visual platforms.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jasmine. I think, for a visual platform, if you're talking about like maybe a text overlay on an image, since Instagram's a really visual medium, I would make sure that the image is still prominent. I think we've all seen a lot of people posting text quotes on Instagram, and I'm like, well, that's not the point. It's supposed to be visual. Um, but when it comes to the text, like on your caption along with the post, I would say shorter is always better, because, people are scrolling through, and we might have to make them stop to hit more. So I don't know off the top of my head what all the text limits are before people have to hit more. I think on Facebook it might have been 420 at one point. So I would say to keep those in mind, but also, if you do want to tell a longer story along with a visual, to maybe set the expectation. Like, hey, we're going to tell a little story here, and, just to let people know that they might have to click a little farther down. So yeah, I would say shorter is better. I know that was kind of a long-winded answer when talking about how to be shorter, but thanks for your question.
Heather's asking, saying, she said she loved the idea of action-oriented content, and she wanted to know if you had any more examples you could share of that.
Yeah, I mean, I probably should have put some more screenshots in the presentation, but yeah, I mean, the action-oriented content, I would say, you know, one of the things I see a lot, I don't want to say the name of the college, but you can tell that it's a lot of PR people that do the Facebook page. So a lot of things are, check out this great news story. I would say that's not actionable. I would say, give a little tidbit about a teaser about what the story is about, and then invite people. You have to learn more. Or I'm planning a writing conference, and some of the tweets that I send out, I say, you've got to see our lineup. So I just kind of show some enthusiasm there. So instead of saying, click here to view our list of speakers, I'll say, hey, you've got to see this lineup, and then I'll just link right to it. I think we don't need to say check out or click here as often as we used to, because it's implied when you're posting it with a link. So I would just say, something really compelling that gets people to take action. So just teaser content, I think, is great.
And another question that we have is, from your experience, in higher ed, and I know it's always great to hear this from different people other than ourselves. What let's see, where is this? I apologize. Now I lost the question. There it is. Do you have any examples of social platforms that you found most effective in your time in higher ed? I know, obviously, we now see a lot of Snapchat and Instagram very clearly in reports, but, from your experience, especially in terms of content, it's when you talk about, words, where have you seen most effectiveness?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm personally a fan of Twitter. I love Twitter, and I wanted it because I believed in it so much. I wanted that to be our number one social platform at Elizabethtown. But what I found was, we had to treat every platform differently because, of course, there was some overlap, but different people, different audiences use those in different ways. So Twitter was great for live, in the moment, capturing really emotional things during, say, commencement, orientation, homecoming. That was a really effective way to tell stories because it was real time and in motion. So there were certain times of the year where we really relied on Twitter for the content. But I would say steadily, Facebook still kind of evoked the most emotion for us because it really, with the commenting beneath the post, it really allowed people to tell stories and be part of a conversation in one spot. Obviously, you can have conversations on Twitter, but it's a little harder to see all at once, especially if you're not a power user that knows how to use tools and lists and things like that. So I would say really, the old standby Facebook was most effective for us in sharing, the storytelling type content, but certain times of the year and for certain purposes, we achieved that through Twitter as well. And I mean, Instagram was also fabulous, but there weren't a lot of conversations that happened. It was really just a lot of likes and things like that. So Facebook was where we had a lot of the back and forth content.
And I would add, too, that data is showing, obviously, students are in a lot of different places, but the way students, if we're talking Gen X for, Gen X or millennials, it's all going to vary based on the group. But there's a lot of using Twitter, I see from students in conversations as a news source. So, they are going and they are learning. They may not engage in the way that you and I engage. So I think we always have to look at our data. What is performing? How well is it performing? So I think you make some really wonderful points there. If I'm going to give people another minute or two, excuse me, if they have any questions to ask. And as I do that, as we come to the end of our time here, I just want to say, of course, thank you to all of you for attending. I know not everyone could make it, but this is the first of more because this is a way for us to reach everyone at NYU who does community management, which means I don't care what country you're in, we're able to get you with this. And that's something we could not do in the past. So I'm really excited about this. It's a long time coming. And if you have suggestions, I want to hear it. Feel free to email me at chris.barrows@nyu.edu. As I mentioned earlier, if you have questions about our Slack group, if you've got questions about Slack, period, it's a really wonderful way to engage. And I would really love to see you all on the platform because I'm dropping in social media news every single day if I see it. And it's a little bit easier than sending you to the Scoop It page. So would love to see all that. And otherwise, I just want to thank you all for taking time to attend. I don't see any other questions. So at this time, I'm going to end the broadcast. And again, we will meet up again on March 7th. There'll be a student panel on that day. More information to come to you via email, via the Google group, and via Slack. So thank you again, and we will all talk soon. And thank you to you, Donna.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.